old problem of a widening of the gap between the top and the bottom in the economy. But since the people who are running the show in our country and in all of the Western European countries are firm believers in fiat money, and since they're not being challenged, and since the average citizen doesn't really know anything about this and doesn't have any other view, can't even picture any other way to run an economic system, they don't believe in the free market. They haven't even heard that phrase in decades. They just think that the economy has to be controlled from the top. And since those two conditions are in place, I don't see any change coming about. It's just going to continue to be more of the same.
Well, top economists such as Nouriel Roubini are now claiming that the markets may actually be shut down soon due to panic selling and a new Great Depression could unfold, or perhaps something even worse. But, there was similar talk following the 1987 stock market rout, where we saw within a few months markets recovered surprisingly quickly. Do you think that the powers that be will be able to plug the hole in this dam this time around?
I think they will plug part of it, but not the whole thing. You see, we have to keep in mind that while they're pouring money into the bucket, creating money out of nothing and putting it into the financial community and paying for military excursions and paying for boondoggles and all these other things, the hole in the bottom of the bucket is very large, and the money is pouring out bottom almost as fast, maybe in some cases faster, than going in the top. And that hole I'm referring to is the loss of value in stocks and in mortgage values, and people losing their jobs, inventories being contracted, companies cutting back in manufacturing, retail sales dropping off, the velocity of money through the economy slowing down. All of these things result in virtual money going out of the bottom of the bucket. So even though they're pouring tremendous amounts in, tremendous amounts are going out, and we may not see the inflationary effect that we would expect quite as quickly or quite as high because of this balancing effect. But as I mentioned before, the new money coming into the system is not being evenly spread throughout. It's going at the very top stratas into those who are politically connected, those who are the beneficiaries of these bailout programs. Whereas the average guy down here in the middle trying to make a living and save his home and keep a job, he's the one that's really being squeezed. So the question really is, are they going to be able to plug the hole? Well, it depends on which hole. Whose hole are we talking about? I think they're going to be able to plug the hole at the very top for the politically connected, but for the poor guy in the middle, he's going to be left holding the bag.
Besides, regardless of how bad things may ultimately become, the major indexes, they are sharply lower, and that will spill over into nearly everyone's 401ks, retirement accounts. I mean, it's not just the little person that's going to be hurt here, but the middle class and those that are dependent on fixed income. You alluded to, I think, hyperinflation, or at least inflation, as a result of this monetary expansion. We all know that the fixed income folks will be hurt the most as they see their purchasing power eroded and their investment income and interest rates, of course, going through the roof. Let's move on to something that I think you've probably also been following, and that's the options-only adjustable rate mortgages. This is just a fancy term for a huge number of mortgages that were given out there. Very fancy, very exotic. There's all types of names associated here. Over the next 2 years, 2009, 2010, this, I think, is going to be the critical shoe to drop on the housing market. I'm sure you've heard that there's a mountain of these recasts that will reset, as I said, in the next 2 years, and that will, I think, drop a huge surplus of homes on the already troubled housing sector, sending inventory levels much, much higher, just at the wrong time, just as perhaps the worst recession in the nation. My research is also showing that this event could lead to price capitulation on the downside, leading the Case-Shiller index down to maybe 35% from its peak.
Well, these are all predictions or suspicions of what's likely to happen, and I must say that I do tend to agree with your evaluation. But, I'm very poor at talking about the future, except in the broad sense. I don't know when things are going to happen, but I got a pretty good idea that they will happen at some point. But calling the exact date has always been a impossible thing. In fact, I thought this implosion that we're now seeing, I really thought we'd see that 20 years ago. and I couldn't believe that they kept the bubble up and growing for 20 years longer than I expected it. So my calendar is not very good, but my direction finder is pretty good. And so I think that if we don't have to put a date on it as to whether it be the next year or the next 2 years, I certainly don't see any way around the fact that these mortgages, these interest-only contracts, are going to implode even further. I don't know how people are going to handle them, especially if the economy continues downward, because they just won't be able to earn the money to pay those monthly payments, especially with the value of the property underlying it getting smaller and smaller at the moment. And yet these huge values must be sustained in terms of interest rates. It's just on the surface of it. It cannot be continued for much longer. It's beginning to happen now, I understand. But when it finally comes on full force, I think that we're going to see maybe another 20% of the market go belly up.
Well, I'd like to shift gears here a bit to a topic that I know is near and dear to yourself, the cures for cancer. I understand that you've done considerable research using vitamin B17 and its derivative.
Call it B17. It's not an officially designated number, but the discoverer of it, Dr. Ernst T. Krebs Jr., called it vitamin B17, mainly because there had been 16 other varieties of vitamin B identified and officially accepted, and he felt that this was similar in nature to the other B vitamins, and so he said it should be vitamin B17, but officially it's not recognized as such. The actual word for it, as is found in nature, is amygdalin, and that's a well-identified chemical. You'll find it in many pharmacopoeia. It was been around for almost 100 years, and used pharmacologically for almost that length of time for various things. But when it's purified and concentrated and used in cancer therapy, they call it Laetrile. So you've got these three different names, all pretty much the same substance. The amygdalin molecule is really what we're talking about. It's an amazing thing. I had a chance to really go into that quite deeply with the help of my scientifically gifted friends who explained it all to me numerous times. I finally got it. The molecule is made up of 2 parts of glucose or sugar